The fluorescent lights of Westridge High buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that made everything look washed out and slightly unreal. Zora Matthews sat perfectly still in her assigned seat, back straight, eyes forward, her notebook open, but empty as the teacher's voice droned on about cellular respiration. She'd been at Westridge for exactly 3 weeks now, and still the air felt wrong against her skin. Too cool, too manufactured, too different from the school she'd left behind. Zora didn't fidget. She'd learned long ago that stillness was its own kind of armor. Psst, hey, new girl, the whisper came from her left, where Jason Mercer sat slouched in his chair, designer sneakers stretched into the aisle, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Zora didn't turn her head. She'd encountered boys like Jason before, the kind who wore entitlement like cologne, who'd never had to wonder if a space belonged to them because the world had told them everything did. Jason leaned closer. I said, hey, you deaf or something, the guy? Teacher continued writing on the whiteboard, oblivious. Zora kept her eyes forward, her breathing measured. In, hold, out. The way Coach Rodriguez had taught her. Control your breath, control your mind, control the fight. Leave her alone, someone murmured from behind them. She's not bothering anyone. Maybe that's the problem, Jason replied, voice carrying just enough for the surrounding desks to hear. 3 weeks and she hasn't said more than 10 words. Acting like she's too good for us. Zora's pencil remained motionless between her fingers. It wasn't about being too good. It was about being different in a place that had already decided what different meant before she'd ever walked through the doors. The pencil was cool against her skin, grounding her as the familiar heat of unwanted attention crawled up her neck. When the bell rang, she gathered her books with precise movements. Sliding them into her backpack without rushing, Jason brushed past her, shoulder checking her just hard enough to make her step back. Not an accident. Never an accident. You should watch where you're going, he said, loud enough for others to hear. It's rude to take up so much space. The irony wasn't lost on her. How she'd spent 3 weeks trying to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable, while boys like Jason expanded to fill every inch they could claim. She said nothing, just readjusted her bag and continued toward the door. In the hallway, the crowds parted around her like water around a stone. Not because they feared her, but because they hadn't yet decided what to make of her. The new girl, the quiet one. The black girl with the intricate crown of braids who never joined the lunchroom chatter or lingered after final bell. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was what lay beneath the silence, the years of training, the discipline that had shaped her muscles and honed her reflexes. The medals tucked away in a box beneath her bed. National Junior Champion, 2021. State Finals, 2022. The countless hours in the gym with Coach Rodriguez, learning to channel everything, anger, fear, doubt, into something controlled and purposeful. At her old school, they'd known. They'd seen her compete. They'd respected the quiet, not as weakness, but as focus. Here, her silence was misread as submission, a mistake they hadn't yet realized they were making. 3 days later, Zora sat cross-legged on her bed, phone pressed. To her ear, her free hand working through her braids, checking for any that needed tightening. How's the new school? Coach Rodriguez's voice was tinny through the speaker, but the familiar cadence of it made something in Zora's chest loosen. It's fine. She paused. Different. Different how? Zora hesitated. How to explain the subtle weight of being watched but never seen? The careful calculations she made each morning about how to move through the halls, where to sit, when to speak. Just different, she said finally. The team here isn't like ours. More focused on tournaments, less on technique. Coach Rodriguez made a disapproving sound. You keeping up with your training? 5 miles every morning. Bags 3 times a week. Forms. Daily. Good. Don't lose your edge just because you're in a new environment. Remember, discipline doesn't take breaks, Zora finished, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. I know, Coach. That's my girl. National qualifiers are in 4 months. I've already spoken to the coordinator about your transfer. You'll represent Westridge, but nothing changes about our plan. After they hung up, Zora moved to the floor, assuming the starting position for her evening forms. As her body flowed, through the familiar patterns, block, step, punch, turn, her mind quieted. This was the real sanctuary, not silence, but movement with purpose. Each form a reminder that her body belonged to her, that she knew exactly what it could do, exactly how far it could go. Her mother appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame to watch. You know, she said softly, you could try making some friends at this school. Join a club. Sit with someone at lunch. Zora completed the form before answering. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to finish the year, compete in nationals, get scouted, hopefully earn a scholarship. Her mother sighed. Life isn't just about the plan, Zora. Sometimes it's about the detours. Detours waste time, Zora replied, starting another form. And time is the one thing I can't get back. The incident happened on a Thursday, during 7th period art class. Zora hadn't wanted to take art, she'd argued for another PE credit. Instead, but her counselor had insisted that colleges wanted to see well-rounded students, not just athletes. So there she was, bent over a piece of charcoal paper, attempting to sketch the still life arrangement at the center of the room, when she felt it, a presence behind her, too close, deliberately quiet. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. With warning, she didn't turn around. Her body tensed minutely, weight shifting to the balls of her feet, a reflexive preparation she'd drilled into muscle memory. Around her, the classroom continued its gentle hum of activity, the scratch of pencils, muted conversations, occasional laughter. There was a subtle movement of air, then a distinct sensation of something cold and metal sliding against the nape of her neck, just beneath her braids. The snip was almost inaudible, but Zora felt it like a thunderclap, a sudden release of weight. A violation so intimate it momentarily stole her breath. Someone had cut her hair. Laughter erupted behind her. Jason and his friends, Tyler and Marcus. The sound rippled outward as other students turned to look, some joining the laughter, others watching with wide eyes or uncomfortable smiles. There, Jason said, voice thick with satisfaction. Lightened your load a little. Those things looked heavy. Zora didn't move. Something cold and precise had settled in her chest, like the moment before a match when everything beyond the mat faded away. She could feel several of her braids, the ones she and her mother had spent hours creating, the ones that connected her to a heritage Jason could never understand, now severed, hanging loose against her shoulder. Ms. Peterson, the art teacher, finally looked up from helping another student. What's going on over there? Jason, return to your seat, please. Just helping out the new girl, Jason replied, dangling a pair of scissors in one hand. In the other he held a handful of braids, waving them like a trophy. These fake things were weighing her down. Probably why she never talks. Too much pressure on her brain. More laughter. Ms. Peterson frowned but didn't move from her spot across the room. That's not appropriate, Jason. Go back to your work. Please. That was it. No confiscation of the scissors, no serious reprimand, no recognition of what had just happened. Zora finally turned in her seat, slowly, deliberately. The room seemed to quiet as she moved, as if her silence had become a presence of its own. She looked directly at Jason, who still stood there smirking, her braids clutched in his fist like they were nothing. Like they weren't pieces of her. Give them back. Her voice was calm, controlled, barely above a whisper. Jason's smirk widened. Oh, she speaks. What do you need them for? They're not even real hair. Zora stood up. She wasn't particularly tall, 5'6", on a good day. But something in the way she carried herself made the space around her seem to contract. Her eyes never left Jason's face. I said, "Give them back." Jason glanced at his friends, sharing in some private joke. "Or what? You gonna cry about it? Run to the principal? Go ahead." Zora had spent years learning when to strike and when to wait, when aggression served and when patience was the better strategy. In the ring, timing was everything. Move too soon, and you telegraph your intentions too late and you miss your opening. She waited now, one heartbeat, two, assessing the distance between them, the positions of his friends, the watching eyes of their classmates. She noted the way he held himself, weight on his back foot, chest puffed out, chin slightly raised, the posture of someone who'd never had to defend himself, who mistook his safety for invincibility. "This is the only time I'll ask nicely," she said, the words measured and precise. Jason rolled his eyes, turning to his friends. "You hearing this? She's threatening me now." He looked back at Zora, stepping closer into her space. "Listen, I don't know what kind of school you came from, but here you don't—" He never finished the sentence. Zora's right hand shot out, fingers wrapping around his wrist, the one holding her braids, with crushing pressure. Her left palm struck upward under his elbow, hyperextending the joint just enough to cause instant searing pain without breaking. Anything. A precise application of force. Jason made a sound between a gasp and a yelp, his fingers involuntarily releasing the braids. Zora caught them with her left hand before they could fall, never loosening her grip on his wrist. "Don't touch what isn't yours," she said quietly, finally releasing him with a small push that sent him stumbling back into Tyler. The room had gone completely silent. Ms. Peterson stood frozen by her desk, mouth slightly open. Jason cradled his arm against his chest, face flushed with pain and humiliation. "You crazy bitch," he hissed. "You could have broken my arm." "If I wanted to break it, it would be broken," Zora replied simply. She gathered her belongings with one hand, the severed braids still clutched in the other, and walked toward the door. No one moved to stop her. In the hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoed against the lockers. Her heart was beating steadily, neither racing nor sluggish. She wasn't running away. She was making a strategic retreat. Coach Rodriguez's voice echoed in her mind. Sometimes the smartest fight is the one you walk away from before it escalates. She found the girls' bathroom at the end of the hall, empty in the middle of class period. Only then, in the harsh fluorescent light, did she look at what they'd done. 6 braids, cut jaggedly about 2 inches from her scalp, leaving uneven ends that stuck out awkwardly from her otherwise neat rows. 6 braids that had taken her mother nearly 40 minutes each to create, working oil into Zora's scalp, fingers gentle but firm as they wove the extensions with her natural hair. Zora laid the severed braids carefully on the edge of the sink, then gripped the porcelain with both hands, finally allowing herself to feel the rush of anger she'd been holding at bay. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes clear, jaw set. This wasn't over. But it wouldn't end the way Jason thought it would. Principal Hargrove's office smelled like cheap coffee and copy paper. Zora sat perfectly straight in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap, the cut braids laid out on his desk like evidence. "Ms. Matthews," he began, sighing heavily. "Fighting is against school policy. It doesn't matter who started it or why." "I didn't fight anyone," Zora replied evenly. "I defended myself after being assaulted." Hargrove's eyebrows rose. "Assaulted? That's a very serious accusation." "Is it an accusation if it actually happened? He cut my hair without my consent. That's assault." "I understand you're upset about your hair situation, but this isn't a situation," Zora interrupted, her voice still calm but harder now. "This is a violation. If I had walked up to another student and cut off pieces of their body without permission, would you call that a situation?" Hargrove looked uncomfortable. "Hair isn't exactly. For black women, our hair is part of our identity. It's culturally significant. It takes hours to create these styles, hours of care and maintenance." She leaned forward slightly. "But even if none of that were true, even if it were just hair, no one has the right to touch me or take pieces of me without consent." The principal shifted in his seat, glancing at the door as if hoping someone would interrupt. When no rescue came, he clasped his hands on the desk. "Look, Jason's parents are very involved in the school community. His father sits on the board. I'm not saying that excuses his behavior, but it complicates things for you," Zora finished. "I understand politics, Principal Hargrove. What I don't understand is why they should matter more than what's right." A knock at the door saved Hargrove from responding. His secretary poked her head in. "Mrs. Matthews is here." Zora's mother entered, her face a careful mask of professional calm. A corporate attorney by trade, she wore her courtroom expression, neutral but somehow authoritative. She nodded at the principal before sitting beside Zora, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. "Thank you for calling me, Principal Hargrove. I understand there was an incident involving my daughter." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "There was an altercation in art class. Jason Mercer claims Zora attacked him, nearly broke his arm. Zora claims Jason cut her hair without permission." He gestured vaguely at the braids on his desk. Mrs. Matthews' expression didn't change, but her hand tightened slightly on Zora's arm. "I see. And what actions are you taking against the student who assaulted my daughter?" Hargrove blinked. "As I was explaining to Zora, this situation is complicated. We have two very different accounts of what happened, and—" "Let me be clear," Mrs. Matthews interrupted smoothly. "My daughter's hair was cut without her consent. That is, by definition, assault. It's also, arguably, a hate crime, given the significance of black women's hair and the historical context of forcibly cutting it to humiliate and control." The principal's mouth opened and closed without sound. "Now," she continued, "you can handle this internally, with appropriate consequences for the student who committed this assault, or I can file a police report and involve the authorities. Additionally, I can contact the ACLU regarding the school's handling of racial harassment. Which would you prefer?" The silence that followed was heavy with a shifting power dynamic. Hargrove's gaze moved between mother and daughter, noting perhaps, for the first time, the same steel in both their spines. "Mrs. Matthews, I assure you we take these matters seriously, but escalating to legal threats is entirely appropriate when my child's bodily autonomy has been violated, she finished. This isn't a threat, Principal Hargrove. It's a promise of consequences if this situation isn't addressed properly. Zora watched the exchange with quiet pride. This was where her own strength came from. Not just the training with Coach Rodriguez, but years of watching her mother refuse to be diminished, to be silenced, to accept less than what was right. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Jason would be suspended for 3 days. A formal apology would be required upon his return. The incident would be documented in his permanent record, and the school would implement a cultural sensitivity training for all faculty and students, with specific focus on respecting cultural differences. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As they left the office, Zora's mother squeezed her shoulder. "You okay, baby?" Zora nodded. "I didn't break his arm." Her mother's lips twitched. "I know. You could have. But you didn't. That shows restraint. Character. Coach Rodriguez says the strongest fighters are the ones who know exactly how much force to use. No more, no less." "Smart woman," her mother murmured. "We'll fix your braids this weekend. I'll call the salon, see if they can take us." Zora fingered the uneven ends sticking out from her scalp. "I think I might want to try something different, maybe twists instead, or a full rebraiding." Something in her voice made her mother look at her more closely. "This isn't about the style getting ruined, is it?" "No," Zora admitted. "It's about choosing change rather than having it forced on me." Her mother nodded slowly. "Control the narrative." Exactly. Word. Spread through Westridge like wildfire. By the next morning, the story had grown with each retelling. In some versions, Zora had flipped Jason over her shoulder. In others, she'd nearly broken his arm with a single twist. The most outlandish claimed she'd been seconds away from using the art scissors on him before Ms. Peterson intervened. None were quite accurate, but the effect was the same. When Zora walked into first period, conversations hushed, heads turned, eyes tracked her movement across the room. The silence wasn't like before, not dismissive but wary, assessing. She took her usual seat, back straight, face composed, and opened her notebook as if nothing had changed. But something had. The air felt different against her skin now, charged with a new awareness. At lunch, a girl named Amara slid onto the bench across from her. Zora had noticed her before. One of the few other black girls in their grade, usually surrounded by friends from the debate team. "Mind if I sit here?" Amara asked, though she'd already set her tray down. Zora shrugged. "Free country." "So," Amara said, unwrapping her sandwich, "you do martial arts or something?" "Muay Thai. Some jiu-jitsu." "Cool. I tried karate when I was 10. Hated it." She took a bite of her sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. "Jason Mercer's a jerk. He's been harassing freshmen since the beginning of the year, making comments about Aisha's hijab, asking Luis if he jumped the border. Teachers never do anything." Zora looked up from her food. "Why are you telling me this?" Amara met her gaze directly. "Because you did something, and now people are paying attention. I didn't do it to make a statement. Doesn't matter why you did it. What matters is it happened, and now there's a crack in their little bubble. And cracks can get bigger if you know how to apply pressure." Zora studied the girl across from her, recognizing something familiar in her directness. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Amara leaned forward. "Some of us have been documenting incidents for months. Microaggressions, harassment, teachers looking. the other way. We've been trying to get the administration to take it seriously, but they keep dismissing it as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. And now they can't ignore it. You've got leverage. We could use that. Zora was quiet for a moment, thinking. She hadn't come to Westridge looking for a cause. She'd wanted to keep her head down, focus on training, stay on track for nationals. Detours waste time, and time was the one thing she couldn't get back. But maybe this wasn't a detour. Maybe it was part of the path she hadn't recognized yet. "Am I listening?" she said finally. Jason returned from suspension the following Thursday, noticeably subdued. He avoided Zora's gaze in the hallways, kept his distance in the classes they shared. The whispers continued, but they'd evolved from shocked recounting to something more nuanced. Discussions about boundaries, about consequences, about what it meant to stand up, and what it cost to stay silent. Zora had spent the weekend at the salon with her mother, emerging with a new style, shorter, with intricate twists that framed her face differently, making her look older, more defined. Her own choice. Her own reclaiming. When she walked into art class that day, she took her usual seat without looking at Jason, who had arrived early and was hunched over his sketchbook at the far side of the room. The tension in the air was palpable, as other students filtered in, glancing between them with undisguised curiosity. Ms. Peterson cleared her throat nervously at the beginning of class. "Before we start today, I believe Jason has something he'd like to say." All eyes turned to Jason, who stood reluctantly, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm sorry for cutting your hair," he mumbled, the words clearly rehearsed and reluctant. "It was wrong and disrespectful. It won't happen again." Zora met his gaze steadily. "Thank you for the apology," she said, her voice clear in the silent room. "I accept it." She could have left it there, a formal closure to an uncomfortable chapter. But something in Jason's posture, in the whispers that still circulated, in Amara's words about cracks and pressure, made her continue. "I'd also like to say something." She stood up, turning to face not just Jason but the entire class. "What happened wasn't just about me or my hair. It was about boundaries, about respect, about understanding that our bodies, our cultures, our identities are not objects for others to touch, alter, or mock without consent." The room was utterly silent. Even Ms. Peterson seemed transfixed. "I came to this school wanting to be invisible," Zora continued. "To blend in, to not make waves. But I've realized that silence doesn't protect you. It only makes it easier for others to write your story for you. So I'm choosing to speak now, and I hope you'll really listen." She looked directly at Jason then. "I forgive you, because holding on to anger would only hurt me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means creating a path forward where we can all do better, be better." When she sat down, the silence lingered for a long moment before Ms. Peterson cleared her throat again, voice slightly unsteady as she began the day's lesson. Later, in the hallway, Amara fell into step beside her. "That was some speech, not what I expected." Zora shrugged. "Fighting isn't just about knowing when to strike. It's about knowing what you're fighting for. And what are you fighting for?" Zora looked down the long corridor, at the students moving between classes, at the teachers standing in doorways, at the posters promoting school spirit and academic excellence. A system that had existed long before her arrival and would continue long after she left. "Change," she said simply. "Not just for 3 weeks or 3 months. but the kind that lasts after the story stops being told. Amara smiled, a slow, spreading thing full of possibility. Then we've got work to do. Zora nodded, feeling something shift inside her. Not a detour, but an expansion of the path she'd always been on. A fighter didn't just defend herself, she defended what mattered. And sometimes, what mattered most was making sure the fight didn't need to happen again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, Coach Rodriguez checking in on her training schedule, her prep for nationals, the plan they'd mapped out together. The plan that hadn't accounted for what would happen at Westridge, for the moment when a pair of scissors would cut more than just her hair. She would call him back later, explain that she was still on track, still disciplined, still focused. But the target had widened. The fight had evolved, and Zora Matthews was more than ready.